Jim Speck. I'm a professor in agronomy and horticulture department at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Gary Zobek over here is my colleague today. He's a UNL extension educator from York County. And our topic, Chuck Burr couldn't be with us today, but irrigation management is our topic today. And since it's the soybean management day, we're talking about soybean irrigation management. So I'd like to start out with the simple aspect here, and that is what I call the 3.25 to 1 rule in corn soybean rotations and irrigation. If your irrigated crop rotation is corn and soybeans, your long-term yield ratio for your corn and soybeans should follow this ratio. That means for every 3.25 bushels of corn you raise per acre, you should also raise 1 bushel of corn or soybeans. So let's say your 5-year average on your corn yield on your farm is 195. Divide 195 by 3.25 and you get this value 60. That's the routine you should get on your farm for a 5-year average of soybeans. If it's 228 corn, it'll be 70 soybeans. If it's 244 corn, should be 75 bushels. Now that's what I strive for every year and generally get for my long-term average of 5, and I'll tell you why. Now when I was at Lincoln, we did an experiment where we were managing corn versus corn soybean, and the guys, some corn guys asked me to manage soybean. I said, okay, I'll do it for one reason. If I beat you in this ratio, you guys got all 4, you got to buy me lunch. If I lose, I have to buy all 4 of you lunch. They said, yeah, we'll do that. They didn't have any idea how well I could manage soybean. So the year I got 85 one year. They didn't even come close to getting that much. Okay, my range is down here, and so I beat them half the time. So I got free lunch, 4 free lunches one year, and then if I lost, I had to pay. But it shows that you can do this, because this is typical. This is based on physiology in the class I teach at the university. I will set this up front. You can write the numbers down, what you should get from your soybean rotation, part of the rotation versus corn, and your irrigated beans. Now, how do you get high yields in soybeans? The first rule that Speck says is have those soybeans green to the eye by the 4th of July. I mean, you're going to capture all the sunlight. The job of a crop producer is to capture sunlight. Sunlight is what you use to do photosynthesis. So you want to give it every opportunity to capture as much light as possible. If you plant in early May or late April, you see we're already covering the rows by the 4th of July. And when you plant in early May, late April, that's when R3 is. Check R3 in your book on page 10, I believe, and tell me what R3 looks like. That's the most critical phase in soybeans for not getting any stress, and make sure you have plenty of water there, because that's when you set the seed number per plant by setting the pod number per plant. Okay? We'll show you a color photo later. But the key thing is that R3, what is it? How many, what is the description that says in there? Read it to me out loud. I'll say something.
Begin potting. 1/4 inch pot at any of the 4 upper stem nodes.
Okay, so you count down to the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you hope to have at least a 1/4 inch pod. Okay? We'll come back to that later. So remember that stage. I'm going to hit it several times because it's a critical stage. Now you can see here the node numbers on these plants. When you plant space them 15 days apart. This one planted on 2 May has 6 nodes, 4 nodes, 2 nodes, and 0 when we took the picture close to the longest day of the year. Here we have 8 nodes. It's already starting to flower on the 24th of June. Okay, so V5, so they're 3 nodes apart because that was a nice warm year. This was a cold year. So, now look at V1 on page 10. V1, that's when you have a cotyledon, 2 unifoliates, and a very tiny first trifoliate. Soybean plants on that day start laying down a new stem node every 3.7 days. Now I can pick that plant, I can water the heck out of it, stress the heck out of it, doesn't make a difference. They're all going to do the same, 3.75, or 1 node every 3.7 days. And you can see that here. Here's an early May planting, the red. Blue is 2 weeks later, green is 2 weeks later, brown is 2 weeks later. Do you see the brown line ever catching up with the red line? No. That means once you start laying down a new node every 3.74 days in your crop, the guy plants 2 weeks later, your neighbor, he's behind 2 nodes already. Okay? So keep that in mind. It's not here to talk about planting date, but the point is, we want to point out that in order to get the highest irrigation yield, you have to make sure you've optimized everything else you can. I'm going to pass this around. Out here, this was planted on May 13. I've numbered the nodes from 0, 1 on up. 0 is the cotyledonary node. You'll see it has 19 nodes. When we go out there, Gary's going to ask you how many nodes we have out there, and we'll tell you that. Now, now, aside from capturing sunlight, what leaves do is photosynthesis to do that. So they take a CO2 molecule, 2 water molecules, and they give off oxygen that we breathe, okay? And they make carbohydrates. From carbohydrates, soybeans make protein and lipids, right? And you get one water molecule back. So just the act of photosynthesis requires only 1 water molecule for every CO2. Now, leaves out there have little pores in the leaves called stomates. They open up at daybreak, they close at sundown. And during the day, they open up to let CO2 in to do photosynthesis. But while they're open, water rushes out because it's 100% humidity inside that leaf. How much? 400 water molecules run out for every time 1 CO2 goes into the leaf. We got 1 CO2 in, 400 out. 1 CO2, 400 water molecules out. So the crop, by the way, I just do this in class, so don't get concerned, I'm going to teach a class. Okay, so the point is you're using a lot of water. For every one of these that goes in, 400 run out. That's going to add up over time, right? How much is that? The slide I use in class. What you're going to see here then is you take that on a daily basis.
Oh, wrong one.
Oh, sorry. I've got to take it from the front again, that's what I'm saying. Oh, it's this one, yeah, they're backwards. So now I got this one up here left. So if you take a daily basis, calendar year here from an early May planting all the way to September when it finally hits R7, black layer in soybeans. It peaks out about here, peak out a little higher further west, but on average it's going to be like this. We measure that in ET. E stands for evaporation of water from soil and other surfaces. T stands for the movement of water from those pores. That's called transpiration in plants. So ET is a measure of the water coming off that canopy, whether it's from the leaves or the ground below it. If you look across here, you see on an average year we start very low. We don't have very many leaves. Gradually, as we get more leaves, we peak up here until the plant's full of leaves, the canopy's full, and then we slowly go downhill after we start filling the pods with seeds. You see the difference right here between R2 and R3 is where we peak. So, how much that is in this particular plot, averaged over 30 years, is 1/3 of an inch. Gary's going to ask a question.
How many gallons of water is there in an acre inch?
27,000 change.
27 and change. 27,154.
Okay? How much is 1/3 of that? 9,000, right? So 1 acre out here in this time, there's 9,000 gallons of water going up into the air. 9,000. Ever thought about carrying 9,000 buckets of 9,000 gallon buckets of water? So if you have 125,000 plants out in that field, how much are they drinking each one? No one has it, I guess? Right here. 1 cup for each of those 125,000 plants in an acre per day! Per day. All right? We're going to save this because we're going to show you how the meter works.
On those high days.
Yeah. So right here is where that's an average year. We all know we never have an average year, right? Some years we run very high. Maybe out in Scotts Bluff we might use a 1/2 inch a day. Today probably we're down in this range down here. We're close to August. We're running well below that line. We may be only throwing off 1/10 of an inch.
Because our ET gauges in York, this estimates crop water use by dropping, it evaporates out to the top. It's dropped an average of 1 inch the last 2 weeks. You multiply by 1.1 during the peak season, so that's about 14 or 15 hundredths a day, well off that peak because we've had cooler conditions, a lot of humidity. So that's why, you know, that curve is okay. It maybe happened once in history, but you need
It's an
to
average,
use
obviously.
some kind of tools to be more accurate.
And you see, obviously, this is one of the values for one typical year somewhere. It just shows it fluctuates quite a bit, but when you average over 30 years, you can see the smoothness, okay? These are daily values. So you go along, you're going to hit a peak of 0.3 here, let's say on average, and come back down. So if you summed all those up, cumulative we call it, this is the kind of curve we're going to get. And I want you to remember this red curve because we're going to show you we do the same thing in SoyWater. This is a crop I grew in Lincoln, planted on April 27th and emerged on May 8th, about 85 bushels an acre off of that crop. This is how much water it slowly used over time until we hit 19 inches at the end of at the mid-September point. So I want to round this number up to 20. 20 acre inches is how much water. You already said 1 acre inch is what? 27,154. How much is 20? 500,000. We're all supposed to drink a gallon of water a day, right? That amount of water would supply 500,000 humans 1 day's worth of water, right? And people on the West Coast and the East Coast think we're wasting water. They don't know crap about soybeans or other crops, right? This is the amount of what the crop would have to use even if there was no irrigation to get that yield up. And it's all got to be pulled up by plant roots and root hairs in particular. Okay? What does Mother Nature deliver? Well, on average, I took the value for average, it was 12.84 from the time one crop emerged until it reached R7, as we talked about later. 12.84. So we're short in Nebraska. Much more shorter as we go west, right, Gary? Okay? So what you see, we're 6 inches. But we have a bank that we can work with. A bank. It's called the SoyWater Bank. Those of you have that silt loam soil, Gary has it in York County, the lucky guy. 2 1/4 inches of water stored per foot. 2 1/4 times 3 feet, 6.75 inches you can save in the ground, of which half is available for the crop at any time. What we got out here, loamy sand?
Yep.
How much is it stored per foot, Gary?
1.1.
Multiply that times 3, you only got 3.3, of which only half can be used, right? So your bank account is pretty small in that case, right? Versus the bigger one. So this allows you to carry over a little more between rainfall and irrigation events, right? So keep this in mind. Where's this crossover point where Mother Nature, if I accumulate her and divide it out each day, so it's level, if she were to be that nice, she never is. Where's that point crossover? She gives us too much water here. Well, not too much. More water than we need. She gives us insufficient water here, right? The crossover point is what? R3, the most critical phase in soybeans where you set the seed number per plant. Okay? We'll keep coming back to that. So what kind of tools we have? Gary's going to talk about some insight tools. We'll talk about some SoyWater tools. As soon as I mention this one, Gary will mention it. So we now have something called SoyWater on a website. It's brought to you by your Soybean Board. They funded a lot of this research. We're going to talk about soybean irrigation tool, but you can also plug in data from a SoyWater sensors. Gary?
How many of you have been to the site Crop Watch? Okay, quite a few of you. Hopefully all of you will write Crop Watch down. It's an electronic newsletter that UNL has information about soybean production, corn production, all types of production. So Jim would say Google SoyWater and you'll get to his tool. I say go to Crop Watch, then hit on soybeans and you can go ahead and get there. Another tool, if you're interested in irrigation management, would be to go to water.unl.edu. At that site, we'll talk about tools like our ET gauges and watermark sensors. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but we've got a network of producers using those tools that has grown from 15 growers to over 1,000 in the last several years. And so we'll talk more about that. And SoyWater, fine-tune it with some of these other tools and do a great job.
So you have 3 buttons you can press when you get to SoyWater after getting it on Crop Watch. We'll talk about this one. We'll talk about this one in the last slide Gary presents. And there's also soil. If you don't know what your soil texture in your field, it can help you find it. Okay? So go to that website. If you're a new user, register. We have to have you registered to get your email to know that you're a real person, not some hack from LA or New York that's trying to disrupt our website. So that way, once you register, you're good for life, and we know you're a good guy. The first thing that'll pop up on your screen, SoyWater wants to know where your field is. So it gives you a default field here, which is located at the center pivot that we just picked out in central Nebraska. Okay, this is a Google Earth map kind of. And so I was working with a York producer. He's hypothetical. We'll keep his name confidential because he is hypothetical, but I use him as a foil to talk about this. So SoyWater's asking you, Master, I need to know something about where your field is. Now, if you've got a GPS coordinate already, type it in here, latitude and longitude, it'll go right there. On the other hand, if you're like me, I don't know what longitude and latitude even mean. Well, I know what it means, obviously, but I don't know offhand for all my fields. So here's some tips. You click up here and you get a tip on how to, several tips on how to do this. So this soybean producer, I kind of teach him how to use it. He says, okay, I click up there. He says, okay, I see a help thing here. It says, type in the zip code. That'll get you close. Zip code for your mailing address. Mine would be 68135 or something like that. That's one way it gives you an overview. High in the sky. You can type in the city and town. That's what most people do to get close. Or your rural farm address, your mailing address. One of the producers here was Richard Bartek, is 1141B, County Road D, Ithaca, Nebraska. You can type that in. Or if you know where the intersecting roads are, and your center pivot is one of those quadrants, you just type in the intersecting roads. Okay. Well, this farmer says, I said, what's your intersecting road? He said, gosh, I drive down there every day. He lived in New York, but I don't remember the county road name that goes by there. All right, type in York, Nebraska. He didn't live near his place, so type in York, Nebraska, and bingo, SoyWater responds, Master. By the way, computer programs are stupid. You're the brains. They're the slaves. You're the master, okay? Keep that in mind. These tools are slave dumbbell, slaves do it to you, okay? And they don't know very much except what we program in, okay? So it goes there, and you can see the GPS coordinates for York, latitude, longitude. So I said, okay, where's your field from there? And he says, well, it's about 3 or 4 miles south. I said, press this button here, the down arrow, and then the map will move up till we get your field. And when he was done on his home computer, and he was talking to me on the phone, I was tracking him. I said, keep pressing this button until you see your field. So he did. And it's just a little primer for using SoyWater. So he did. I said, hey, there's my field. Now I know what that road is. It's Road D. Most people don't remember. They drive it for 20 years. They forget what the name is. Okay? Corner of Highway 1 and Road D. And I said, well, if you told me that in the first place, we could have typed that down here. Just put it down there. We got there. We also, if you knew what the center, get one of those little handheld GPS coordinate things, the center of your field, you could have typed that in. That would tell you there too. SoyWater only speaks in latitude and longitude, so that's why you have to converse with it that way. But it'll recognize street addresses, okay? So now you click on your mouse here to make an orange balloon there. That'll be the coordinates. Now SoyWater will search for a nearby weather station. Weather station is needed because water, when it rushes out of the leaf, remember I said there's 400 water molecules for every CO2 that goes in. What causes water to evaporate? Sun, right? So we need to know the solar radiation. How hot or cold a plant is will determine how much water evaporates too, right? Also, what about the humidity? Very important. Plants love high humidity because their interior of the leaves is 100%. Outside it may be 50%, right? Water will rush out on that thing, just like water evaporates from your skin when you get out of the swimming pool on a hot, dry day. And the other thing is wind speed. The wind's blowing from southwest and it's dry as a bone. It's 100 degrees here and the temperature is and the sun is shining. That wind will sweep those 400 water molecules away and replace them with dry air for another 400 water molecules that quickly come out of the leaf, right? Those 4 things we need. So you click down here and get the nearest weather station, and then SoyWater will say, okay, master, off one here. Here we go. I need 4 questions I need you to answer. I told my programmers the KISS principle applies here. Keep it simple, stupid programmers. No, I didn't say programmers, okay, but the KISS principle applies. You want people to easily use a program, not have to dig out the manual, right? So the first thing SoyWater can do is it can remember up to 50 or 100 fields. Nobody uses that much, but let's say you're a crop consultant and you want to do 20. It's better to give them a name, that way you don't have to code the numbers on your wall with the names of where they're at, right? So I called the York guy, to keep his name confidential, I call it Spec Center Pivot 2. It might be Grandpa's 160 or CP south of the house, that sort of thing. Something you easily remember, okay? Remember we talked about that soil water bank, silt loam versus loamy sand? We need to know how much bank water you can bank in the soil to use between rain and irrigations, right? So we need to know this. The guy that works it, hell, I don't know anything about texture in that field. I said, well, here, we got to help. Just click down here and just page down, we'll show you. Okay, so I did that, and I said, put the center pivot, we just looked at, so it's in the center of this frame. And what this does is a soil texture map. These little yellow lines here separate different soil types in the field. And here's the decode table over here. So this is about 200 acre total in this frame. And I'll tell you how many acres are in each soil type, with the yellow lines showing the differentiation. Okay? 79 acres of 3824, which is a Crete silt loam. 3824 right here, 3824 right here, probably some other places in here. So 80, about 80 of the 200 is that. 0 to 1%. Another 56 is a Crete silt loam, same as that, but a little more slope. That's 3825. So here's 3825 around here, and they're probably down here in a few other places, right? Then you go down, there's about 40 acres of a Fillmore seed loam, which is 3953. So if you look on that map, you see those. But you really don't care about the names. In this case, the slopes either for center pivot to some degree. I guess it's water management. So you can see the only difference here is there's some Hastings silty clay loam, and this is, by the way, this is the York farm south of York, and a Crete silty clay loam. So these are the only two types that have a little different, less holding water capacity than a silt loam. And those only amount to about 20 acres out of the 200. So I said, you want to manage your crop according to the predominant soil type. And that's a silt loam. So go back up here, check the menu, and there's silt loam. Click on that one. How many started the year with a full profile here? By that I mean water at field capacity in all top 3 feet. If you did, just accept the default. If you didn't, you have to go out and probe a little bit, see what you have, because SoyWater has no idea what your bank started out with. It doesn't even know you. You're a stranger, okay? We need to know what started out with your bank, because you're asking it to keep track of things. Mother Nature will make rain deposits, you will make irrigation deposits in that account, and the crop, like a college student, will suck out of that account once a day, right? I say that because I was a college student once, right? So we need to know that. And then we need to just know the start date, and the planting date most time, and then the maturity group. Everybody knows how to get a maturity group from the brand number. Pioneer 93M11 is 3.1, and House Growth 3005 is 3.0. So enter that. And if you're planting corn or planting soybeans really early into high yield, heavy residue prior to your corn, you might want to use an emergence stage, because we don't have a way to determine what your soil temperature is under cold no-till conditions. And so SoyWater can misestimate your stage because of that, because the weather stations only provide air temperatures. Okay? Check all those over, hit continue. By the way, this is all on the web. It's very quick. All you need is internet connections. You don't need a heavy computer or anything like that. And up at the top, a table. Now, most of this contains a lot of information here, but new users will just be concerned with this and the bank account over here. Soil water bank account. Okay? This just shows you some historical water use, actual water use. SoyWater is always up to date to midnight of yesterday. So we know what you've already used up to midnight yesterday. We don't know what you're going to use if we're using a 30-year average to predict what to use the next. You have to enter your own rainfall, which I did here at this Lincoln site. Planted on April 30th, maturity degree of 3.1, silver clay loam. You enter your rainfall by clicking on these days, and you enter your irrigation number. We'll show that later. So what we're doing here is there's no seedling above the ground until we get to emergence down here, when we got 400s withdrawn from the checking account by the crop. That's what the cotyledons gave off that day, 400s. Not very much. Next day they gave off 300s. So that's a total of 7. So now we've depleted the bank by 700s, right? Okay? So, if you go down further in the season, and drylanders can even use this, SoyWater will predict what your B stage is, the node numbers you just saw when that plant I passed around. It's very accurate. It will tell you how many nodes you have on a given calendar day, because we have every day of the season. SoyWater has it from the day you planted until the day it matures. So if we went out there on July 5th, we expect to see 11 nodes, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Bingo, that's what you're going to have within plus or minus 1 day. R3. Remember you saw the black and white diagram in your book? Here's a color photo. Right? So R3 is a 3/16 of an inch, quarter inch, I say, pod. That's these guys right here. Flowers and soybeans are a dime a dozen. They have bored 80% of them. But what these things you want, once you get them, you want them to stick. You want them to stick because seeds go in those, okay? And depending on how productive you are up to that time, you'll have a fair number of days. And regardless of how many flowers you have, these are the things you want. Okay? So, how deep is the taproot in soybeans by that time? I planted them on the 30th of April. It's now the 6th of July. How deep is my taproot in soybean? Remember, legumes produce a taproot like alfalfa, soybean, that wussy, or corn, that wussy corn. I call it wussy corn. I like to challenge my corn colleagues. How deep is the root here at R3? 3 feet. Here it's 31 inches because it was a little colder this season. That means when you have plants at R3, 4th of July, after you plant them in late April, they already got a 3-foot taproot. That taproot keeps going down, and it keeps going down, and it keeps going down, and eventually it'll reach 6 foot before the mother plant finally ceases at R7. R6, I guess, is how far. Okay. Remember, that's just a straight taproot that goes right down the center of the row. Gary will talk about. Then the laterals come out, and so it's gathering water not from the center of the row, but from the side of the row. Okay. So, what is the advantage there? You know when the dates are going to be. If you're always put a fungicide on at R3 if you're like an Iowa producer. You know what date it's going to occur 2 weeks before it occurs, and you can line up all the equipment before your neighbor does, right? Applicators.
And, you know, when you first put the information in, the day you put it in, it will predict when R3 is, but it's got a lot of days of weather ahead, and that's based on average.
Yeah.
If you update it a week later, it's going to adjust that. So that first reading may not be the final one because we got to see what the weather is in between.
And like you said, the day you log in, it's good for midnight weather data up to midnight. So if you log in 3 weeks before, you really need to log in repetitively to see if there's been any changes. Cool weather like this slows things down. So let's get back to the point of using it to schedule irrigation. We don't want to apply too much water early. We don't want to apply too much water late. We want to apply them just in time, right? We'll let Gary tell you about some capacity to do that. Okay, so I choose a 35% depletion here. This silver clay loam holds 2 inches of water per foot of soil. So the top 3 foot should have 6 inches. What's 35% of 6 inches? Well, 30%, 33 would be 2, right? So 35 is 2.5. So whenever this column hits 2.5, by entering this number in here, and Gary calls me a liberal water user. I'm actually a conservative political person. He likes to call me a liberal in water use. He'll choose 50%, but let's just see what SoyWater did. I irrigated here on the 19th of July, 1.35 inches. I irrigated again here after a little rainfall event that only covered 1 day worth of transpiration. I irrigated again down here on July 24th, I believe, 25th. And you see SoyWater says, okay, master, if you set this up at 35%, I predict that your next irrigation should be on 1 August. And bingo, that's what I'm going to irrigate. If it doesn't, things don't change, if it doesn't rain, the temperature stays the same way. And Gary says, no, change that to 50% on silver clay loams. You wouldn't do that on loamy sand, right, Gary?
That's correct.
So if I leave that one, I'll put this one up and just point out that the original one I had over here at 35% told me to irrigate on 35%. With 50% of the 6 inches I had available, now I got to have the crop deplete 3 inches or more, right? Before that turns yellow. So what Gary's saying, no crop, extract more from the soil before I irrigate you. That's why he's conservative, right? You want to make the crops work, right? So the key thing there is you can toggle this off and on, do a lot of what ifs. And in particular, what I like to do is I have to have my 40 or 50% prior to R3, switch it down to 30% just before R3, so I make sure an irrigation goes on, then switch it back up to 50%, so I make it work a little harder. And maybe when you get down to the next phase, which is the last irrigation, which Gary will talk about momentarily. I'm on time as we start recording.
We're in good shape.
Okay. So the nice thing about this is R7. So look in your book, look for R7. Everybody knows what black layer in corn looks like, right? Ever wonder what black layer in soybean is? R7. R7. And what does it say at R7? It just has words there. We don't have a diagram. R7 is when there's 1 brown pod on every plant in the field. You got 125,000 out there, there's 1 brown pod. The pods have turned from a dark green to a kind of a yellowish green. But the key thing to look for is when you flip open the pod, does the pod wall membrane still cling to the seed coat? If it does, the mother plant is still feeding that seed. If the pod wall stays with the pod and doesn't stick with the seed, the mother plant says, seed, you're weaned, you're done, okay? That means you don't need to provide the mother plant any more water if all the pods are like that, right? In fact, that's R7. And what you'd like to do is have the plant suck the water out of the soil to 50 or 60% before then, if you only knew when R7 was going to be, right? SoyWater will tell you within a few days, as you get closer and closer, as Gary says, you have to let the natural weather come into play here. It says R7 is going to be on the 4th. Now instead of looking every day at the middle of August onward, you just go out there a few days before and start looking for R7, right? Now you know when to stop irrigating, and better yet, you have the prediction of when to schedule the last irrigation so there's just enough water to make this turn yellow only on the last day. That makes sense? I got this much water to go, 673 from the last time in yellow, and that was a couple of weeks ago since I put 2 irrigations on. So as of the rain that we got yesterday, this just yellowed up now here with a 35% on R7, so I don't have to irrigate it. And I'm still going to get my 75 bushel per acre yield. That's my goal at least. We'll see what happens with the kind of weather we have. Okay? Finally, there are people that say, geez, that's a lot of tabular information. Can you give me a bottom line? I said, press the easy button here. View chart, okay? The chart will show you, remember that red line that we saw before, now blue here. This is what SoyWater has predicted for my crop on East Campus, planted on April 30th, Turdigrade 3-1. Says, master, you're going to use about 17 inches of water before you hit R7. Now this line has come up now because of irrigation, and the last rainfall put me within 3 inches. So it hit, actually 35%, hit 35%, so I don't need to irrigate even though now it's what, 16th of August, and the 4th of September is when R7 is going to occur in this field. Bingo. I've optimized my water at the front and the back, so I have just in time. I'll get high yield by planting early, and I'll use the minimum amount of water. Nobody from the East Coast and the West Coast could say, I waste water because I can tell them differently, right? And the same goes for you guys. We're working on a project now that shows Nebraska producers are the most efficient in the world for both water use and nitrogen use. Okay, Gary.
Okay, we're going to actually go out in the field and show you our plots that we've got out here, but I wanted to mention a couple things. ET gauges are an economical tool that estimate crop water use. Basically, we fill this up with water, water evaporates out the top, we read how much it drops, and then we multiply it by a coefficient. During the peak of the season, it's 1.1. So if this drops 2 inches, we multiply by 1.1, so it's 2.2 inches of crop water use for that week. Early in the season, the coefficient might be 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.35. So it gives you a ballpark figure. It'll probably be a little less than what SoyWater predicts that the automatic weather station does, but it'll give you a ballpark figure. The other tool that we use quite a bit are some kind of tool to monitor soil water. These are watermark sensors. We install them on PVC pipe, and then we bury them at either 1, 2, 3, and up to 4 feet of depth. You can hook them to a data reader like this. It's a handheld, and right now I think it's going to say $199 because it's completely dry. It's actually saying $182. If we
It was in the grass.
It was in the grass.
So what we'll do is we'll pass this around, and you can dip it, we'll dip it in the water, and as Gary's talking, you can click the read
Click the
button.
read button. It will change response really quickly. What we do is we put them in the soil early in the season when the crop is small, and within a week it'll give us a pretty good handle on what it is. High numbers are dry, low numbers indicate wet. We'll talk about the soil types and that make a difference. So this would be the economical method because you're installing them in one location, you're going out with a handheld meter, and then you can chart it or whatever. The next step up would be like those data loggers, those 2 blue boxes over there. You can hook 8 sensors to that. In this case, we've got 2 plots. And so it will keep the data for the entire year. You can see what's happening now, download it or graph it for the entire year. The next step up, well, out in the center pivot field over there, we've got 4 sensors that are hooked to a profiler unit that Servitech sells, and it's got a rain bucket that I can go on my computer at home or my phone, and I can see what the sensors are reading from anywhere. Or like 2 days ago, I checked from the hotel in Norfolk and saw that we got 9,200 worth of rain out here on that particular day. So the easier it is, the more it costs, but we've got a lot of people using those types of tools. The place the ET gauge works the best is probably on sandy soils because you don't have a lot of flexibility. You kind of estimate the crop water use and then you spoon feed it on a regular basis. The better the soils, you can use the sensors because you've got more time in between irrigations. So let's go out here and we'll show you our 4 plots that we have out here. We do want to thank our host for allowing us to do this plot here, and we run a black line all the way from his domestic well there so that we could go ahead and drip irrigate these plots. And we want to thank Central Valley Irrigation from Holdridge. They provided us this drip tape that we used to irrigate these plots. What we've done is we've set up 4-row plots where we've got that main line, and then we've got 4 of these drip tapes running 20 feet into the field. We've got 4-row plots, then we skip a row, 4-row plots, skip a row, 4-row plots, skip a row. Here we can see the non-irrigated plots. Up in Pierce, we could see no difference, but there we only irrigated 2 inches, and I didn't need to irrigate the 1 because partly we had plenty of rainfall, and I think it's a sub-irrigated one. Our sensor readings kept reading wet. wet, I get nervous. It was a sandy field too, and I keep, somebody please look at it. What's it looking like? Well, we only irrigated it the one time there, and that. These have emitters every 18 inches. And so if we run them for 9 hours, we'll put on an inch of irrigation. They're not buried, they're on the surface, which isn't the way you do drip. But we put them underneath the canopy as close to the plant, because if we got sunshine on here and we had a drop of water, we could actually burn a little larger hole at that emitter. And so, you know, I don't know how long they would work efficiently that way, but so that's what we did. Our 4 treatments here, the first one over there was 35% depleted. What that means is we've got 1.1 inches per foot, so that's 3.3 inches. Half of that would be what would half of that be? 1.65 inches, and we wanted to use 35% of that. On our heavier soils, we'd have a lot more difference. The R3 strategy, that's this one. What we waited was to not irrigate here until we got to R3, and that was July 9th. So when we got to R3 here, we put on an inch of water here. The next one over here was R2. We irrigated that slightly earlier. That was July 3rd when we were at R2. We probably could have done it a couple days earlier, but we were actually setting this up about that day, trying to get it to go.
4th of July, so you're pretty close.
And that's when we said R2. And the next one over was 50% depleted. So of that inch 65, 85 hundredths of it was used at that time. So we irrigated the R2 first, then we irrigated the R3, and then after that we irrigated all the plots pretty much the same. They've had up to 6 inches applied on them, and then we've replicated it over there. And the first 2 plots are the R2 and the R3. How many nodes do these plants have?
You see the dryland plot there that didn't get an irrigation tube on it? 19 nodes. The other ones, 19 nodes. All of them. Pass that around again if you want. That's the dryland. So it doesn't make any difference whether you water it or not. It's the planting date. And they could have had 22 or 20 or more if they planted on May 1. That was planted on May 13th or 14th.
Will you take yield data off these two then?
We're going to try and take yield data off the center 2 rows. You know, and so it'll be kind of interesting to see, but you do see a slight increase in height on the R2 versus R3. You know, on sand, a lot of times we get the question, you know, we want to keep them alive until R3 and then get plenty of water on at that particular time. Based on sensor readings, there's a couple times we may have got behind here. It dried out more than we probably should have.
You have center pivot breakdowns too, right?
Yeah.
And how much have you applied to your pivot?
I think we've gone around 4 times.
So-
Right. 7,500 or 7,500.
So you've actually put on a little less than we have, so we may have, you know, over-irrigated here.
Well,
Remember, R7 is when that pod wall membrane it's playing pretty tightly now, so you can see how tightly it's playing. When that comes free of the seed, R7, R7, R7.
So we're at R55 here
Right now,
at this
yeah.
time. So we're going to go back and talk about capacity, but Jim always picks on me.
Yeah, I forgot that. Now, Gary, how come you're a Czech, right?
Yep.
Tell us about Czechs.
Talking about Czechs, and it could be other nationalities, but I'll pick on myself. You know, I can go quite a while and not have a beer. But when I'm hanging around these soybean guys, they kind of like to have a beer, so you have a beer maybe a little more often. What happens after you have the first beer?
you want more.
You want another beer. Watering beans is the same thing. If you start watering them, they're going to grow bigger, they're going to have more leaves, you're going to want to water them more. What happens? They get taller. What happens? They lodge. Okay, what happens if you have too many beers? You lodge and fall over too.
So we're having a real problem making it pay for the round after the third beer.
So kind of think about that. Keep them alive. Put it on at R3. You're going to get the most bang for your buck. So with that, we want to talk about capacity, because a lot of people say, I don't have enough capacity. I can't keep up during peak years like last year. We're going to talk about what your capacity needs are to decide maybe you do have enough capacity to keep up. So we're going to go back and talk about that. To figure your system capacity, all you do is take your output in gallons per minute divided by the acres that you have. So in this example, he's got 750 gallons, 125 acres. He's got a 6 gallons per minute per acre capacity. We've divided Nebraska into 2 regions, eastern and western. Are there any differences? What differences would you think there are between eastern and western Nebraska?
Humidity?
Humidity, yep. So they're going to use more in western Nebraska because it's drier. What other things are different?
Rainfall.
Rainfall, tremendous. 1 inch for every 25 miles as we go from east to west, they get less. So another thing that might be different is the soils. We have different soils, but it does vary tremendously across Nebraska. I can't emphasize too much the value of having excellent soils. It makes farming a lot easier, irrigating a lot easier. My brother-in-law reminds me of that all the time. He lives in an area that's got rolling hills and clay, and our Hastings silt loam is a whole lot different. Okay, our Nebraska capacities are to meet the needs 9 out of 10 years. What was last year? That was that 10th year, and maybe that 1 out of 100 years. But our colleague says it could have been worse last year if we had had less humidity yet. We were pretty fortunate with some of the humidity levels. It could have been worse. How many of you had some of the best irrigated yields you've ever had? Quite a few. In our area, I never took out as many good yields as we did last year. So if you got plenty of water, we were okay. If you've got a silt loam, you need a capacity of about 4 gallons per minute per acre, and you'll get by. You're going to have to schedule really good. You're going to be running a lot, but between the soil, water, and your irrigation, you'll be able to keep up. If you had a loamy sand, you would need more like 5 inches of capacity. If you want to meet peak needs, 5.7 or 6 gallons per minute will meet needs even in the worst years. So how do we calculate that? .7 times 130 acres divided by 85% gives us 871. The 85% is we're not putting it all on. We got to change oil and do some of those kind of things. If you're on load control, you have to even adjust it by more than that. If I've got a silt loam, good soil, I can get by with about a 600 gallon per minute well. And so, a big difference in how much I can cut back and irrigate, only trying to leave room for Mother Nature's rainfall. That's the goal. We want to end the season with the soil deficit, but we want to meet the needs during the critical times for both corn and soybeans. Western Nebraska, we need a lot more capacity because they're drier. Last year at Scotts Bluff, our ET gauge there dropped 4 inches 1 week. You need a lot of capacity in a situation like that. If you had a silt loam soil, you could probably get by. Here, our greatest drop was just about 3 inches, which is still a lot for that 1 week. Those are the weeks Jim remembered. I want to remember the weeks that on average we only drop 20 hundredths a day.
Wishful thinking.
Oh, it's wishful thinking. Okay. Remind you about the soils. Sands are the biggest particles. Silts are in between. The clays are the smallest. They'll hold the most water, but they don't want to release the water as easily, or they don't want it to come into the soil. It'll run off and do things like that. So the best combination is if you can get to those silts, silt loams, those there. The soils right here are these sandy. They just aren't going to hold a lot of water. You can put it on fast, but it's not going to hold as much. So you've got to really be on top of scheduling. This is a chart for the varying soils, and you can use the SoyWater to calculate it, or if you've got an Android phone or an iPhone, you can download a tool or an app we call CropWater, and it will let you put in the sensor readings, and it'll tell you how much we have left and how much you've used. Some people think of it, the beer cup half full. Others think of it as half empty. And so we've tried to do it for both, whichever way you might be thinking about it. This soil, if we have a reading of 33, we're at 60%, 0.6 used. So we're at 50% depleted. If I have a reading of 33 on a Hastings cell loam, I've got a full profile. I haven't used anything. So it's important that you know what soil you're using these sensors on.
Here's one of those tables with SoyWater sensor.
So you can do it either place. The other thing with the CropWater app, it's got a thing to GPS it so you can go back and find those sensors. It also has a charting one that will let you chart it if you want to, chart it during the season. So right here, his R3 ones are reading 13, 18, and 27. That means we've depleted 0.18 hundredths, 0.25, 0.36. We're at about 23% depleted at that site. We've got 0.86 left, and then we'll be near that 50%. So 4 or 5 days like we've been having, we're going to have to irrigate. I've got them scheduled to probably irrigate Monday, give it an inch or so at this particular site. So that gets us to the last thing where Jim started talking about scheduling that last irrigation. You've got that neb guide that we handed out. We're at R55. R5 says we're going to use about 6.5 inches to maturity. R6 says we're going to use 3.5 inches to maturity. So we're somewhere about 4.5 or 5 inches till that R7.
And the bank of water is small.
And we've got a 1-inch bank of water, so we'll, depends upon rainfall and that, we may have to apply 3 or so more inches of water here. So with that, open up for questions. Any questions, comments?
What's the thought process behind 35% depletion being kind of the default setting on SoyWater?
Well, we just chose that simply because 50% on many soil types, like those finer soils, gets you pretty close to the edge. If your center pivot breaks down, part of it's making sure that farmers can look at that, change it if they want to, but we want them to change it from a liberal side to a conservative side with some thought and trepidation.
I thought maybe it was so that, when it turns yellow on there, you turn the pivot on, and that way it makes it around before it gets full.
Well, that's a good question, though.
And that's a good point. The 35% on all our soils, we kind of have that written down as a turn on or a threshold. You need to know your system capacity. If you have a lot of system capacity, you're probably safe with it. But 35% on a silt loam gives you a lot more margin than 35% on a sandy soil. I think maybe you need a 20% threshold on a sand because you're not going to have the time to get around.
But if it takes you 4 days, in the past, still people want 35%. We just say start a day or two before it develops, if you want to keep it at 35. But your system capacity kind of tells how much you're going to lay down. Remember, it's going to change after 2 days. You're going to use 2,500, you're back at 50 hundredths of an inch depletion already again. So we build it so it's flexible. You can choose that as you wish.
The hardest thing a lot of producers tell us when they're using sensors is not irrigating. It's a lot easier to irrigate than it is to not irrigate. And so, our goal is to try and put it on as efficiently as we possibly can. And you got to develop some trust in the tools. It takes some time to start to believe them. We got some guys that believe them 100%, and then we got some guys that are still a little uncomfortable about them.
And eventually, you see, this is all calculated from the weather station. SoyWater is good on the stages, but if we get a little off here, your weather station is a little too far away. You should trust the sensors to some degree and interpret that here. Well, hopefully in the future, we'll have all this built together into one website. And we're developing one for corn, too. I'm not part of that, because we bet too many times against the corn
What do
thing.
you do with your sensors if you got, down here we got some light soils and the other end's got heavy soils?
Oh.
Do you just kind of find the medium?
You
or-
put them where you're gonna, where do you irrigate based on? If you only got a small amount of sand, I probably wouldn't put them there. But if you're majority sand, if you water to meet the sand needs, you're probably gonna meet all the rest.
Even
That's
if it is an excess, you're better not stressing the sandy soil side out too much.
That's the question we always get when we start installing them in a producer's field the first time. They said, where should we put them? I said, well, what are you basing your irrigations on now? You know that spot or spots, and then you kind of want to put them in a predominant field. A corn grower of ours, we put them in at 4 foot, and he said, Gary, those sensors aren't working. They're reading 0. It must be a bad sensor. I said, I don't think so, but when I went out, we went and we pulled it, and when I pulled it, it was completely wet. But what we had done is we put it in a low area where the water drained, and it stayed wet. I put in another 4-footer, it read wet. Eventually, we started using the water out of there. So that spot that you put them is important. The other thing you should always do is go probe around other spots to see if it's doing the same thing. A producer in the Harlan County area put his quite a ways from a canal, but he wasn't far enough. He was getting moisture from the canal and they were reading completely wet, so he stopped irrigating. He didn't irrigate. His corn was starting to dry up, and we went out and probed there, and it was completely dry because he had his sensors in the wrong spot. So you want to check other spots because they don't have any feeling.
What's the cost of those?
They're $33 a piece, so they don't cost very much. They can be used several years. A farmer in Bradshaw area made a puller that you can jack them out. It makes it a lot easier pulling them out. A lot of NRDs will cost you half price on this equipment and stuff like that. So
I use a vice grip.
his has got actually a vice grip with a little conduit, so you don't rough these up, and it works. If you got very many, you're going to want to do something like that.
Any other questions? We've got a little time.
You have to drill a hole before you stick them in the ground.
Coring tube.
We use a crop consultant probe. It's 5/16, so you want really good contact
Doesn't
because
fit tight.
you want this to fit really good and tight at the bottom.
And you want to seal up the soil at the top so water doesn't run down next to it.
Because if you don't, it may run down and say, "Oh, it got completely wet." Well, it didn't, but it'll blend back right up in a hurry.
What we sometimes do during ours, we'll core down for a 1-footer, core down to 9 inches and then pound it in the other 3 inches. Make sure it's in the soil. You're not going to do that in some soil types.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun in
Hard pan.
silt looms
That's why you
than
have
it
a
is
little
in
notch
clay.
at the top so you don't pound off the wires.
And Gary, if you're a dryland farmer, they work good, you can tell when the corn's gonna be dead.
The day before, you'll know when it's gonna die.
As if you wanted to know that.
You know, the other thing that happens in dryland, you know, we talk about it's using 33 units a day. If it doesn't have 33 units a day, it's going to use a little less than that and still try and survive. And so those are under maximum irrigated conditions, some of those numbers.